Okay, welcome to Chapter 6. This was about collecting malware, and oddly enough, you have to get to Chapter 10 to learn how to safely store. So I think these chapters are probably out of order, but I'm going to follow the order in the book. Okay, so Malware Collection, page 109. I'm going to be setting up a malware lab, right? And I want to be able to have a collections lab, a static analysis lab, and a dynamic lab. Now, we're not actually going to do all three of those. We're using the same machine to do all those things, which of course is not correct, but it saves you time and energy building up three separate, virtual machines, each one for each one of these things. So the malware collection lab is basically how you go about collecting and storing malware that you can use later on to do analysis. That's kind of it. So they talk about the sources, your own backyard, so to speak. Your friends and neighbors and yourselves and you. Family members stumble across stuff and you go, let me go grab that. Free sources, yes, there's an awful lot of sources out there you can go and get malware samples to play with. If you're a member of a research group, an awful lot of the malware stuff is not available to everyone because they don't want the bad guys to go in and grab malware samples and start doing things. They're going to do it anyway, but they want to at least make a half-ass effort to prevent that. So you have a mailing list where you subscribe. It's only after you've been vetted, then you can get access to some of that stuff. There's a thing called the sample exchange. Yes, you can go to like Malwarebytes and go grab a sample that they've already run through. Commercial sources, yeah, again, there are companies that do this for a living. And then honeypots, where you could set up your own little trap to try to trap malware. I don't recommend that, but it's something they talk about. So on page 111, they talk about your own backyard. So here you get to actually see it in the wild. I mean, you actually get to see it in an infected machine, So it's not just a bare sample that you download. You're going to have to go in there and extract this guy, and then you get to see it in the wild running. And so your task is to extract this thing, hopefully intact. Remember how you had a dropper that went first? Maybe did a reconnaissance run and maybe came back later with a second thing. Well, the first part's gone, so all you have is what's left over. And so it's not going to be a complete picture of what's left over on your machine because how did it, the vector probably is long since gone and erased itself. So you're not getting everything. Okay. So part of the problem is, of course, you don't have any idea what this thing's actually doing yet. That's the whole point. So extracting is kind of difficult. Now, if it came in on an email, well, then the extraction is incredibly simple. If it came in on a email attachment and they haven't, your friends and family haven't deleted the email yet, well, then your job is easy. No trouble at all. Otherwise, you're going to have to go through sort of like a digital forensics kind of a thing to scan your machine, hunt for things that are out of the ordinary. So let's talk about digital forensics for just a minute. If this was a corporate environment where you think maybe laws were being broken, you were going to have to go in and capture some malware. You don't want your attempts to gather the data to destroy critical data used in law enforcement. So you have to follow some rules. So there's some legal requirements. Most people would do an image of the machine first and store it away. That way you could say, look, before I did anything at all to this machine, I made an exact image backup of this guy. You're welcome to use it if you want to, kind of a thing in a courtroom. And then I went in and remediated the machine. So it's kind of a two-step process. I don't immediately go to remediation if I think there's going to be legal action going on. So the steps for doing this pretty simple. If you're, we're not necessarily talking about email attachment where something is simple. Scan for malicious files. Your antivirus could find some stuff. Look for rootkits. Now that's tough. I remember we talked about how you have to kind of boot into a special environment to be able, because your antivirus can't do that. Remember that? Okay. Inspect startup programs. Yes, we know how to do that. Inspect all the running processes. Yeah, we know how to do that. And extract suspicious files. So your antivirus can get you 75%, 80% there, because it can quarantine things for you, and then you can just grab them and look at them. Cool. But not rootkits. No. It won't be able to do that, and it won't be able to really. The startup and the running processes, yes, that'll help a little bit, but you see what I'm getting at. So scanning for malicious files, page 112. So obviously you're talking about your own AV scanner, right? No big deal. Now, you could think that my AV scanner is compromised because I have a virus on there that could prevent me from running a scan. That's a very logical thing. So maybe your AV scanner isn't the one you need to do. Maybe you need to boot into a different environment and run an AV scan, which is what a lot of these things can do. You download a little WinPE disk that has minimal amount of stuff on it. You boot the machine like that, just like we were talking about with the concept of the rootkit detection. And then you run the antivirus on the C drive there, because the C drive is not running now. So if you had some malware that could defend itself, this would defeat that because it's not running. Cool? The whole idea. In the old days, there were some web-based scanners where you could go to some website and say, scan my machine. Well, those days are gone. I'm sorry. We just don't allow web pages with JavaScript to go down low level and start looking at my C drive. That's just not done anymore. I don't think there's any web server anywhere that will allow that stuff to work anymore. So you can't do that. Now, what you can do is, go to a website. I use Malwarebytes as an example. I download their little guy, and then I run their guy, and I'll try to run it live. Okay, I will. And if I'm satisfied, I'm thinking, okay, I'm done. I've had some people come in and say, I think I have a rootkit, and I go, it's not likely, but let me find out. And so, yeah, I'll go ahead and do the boot off of the thing and then run the thing. But typically, that's not the case. In the family and friends environment we're talking about in your own backyard, you're probably not going to get a rootkit. But so running their own antivirus might be compromised. But if you download a brand new one, just temporary, I go to Malwarebytes. I say, I want your scanner, and I run my scanner, and then when I'm done, I erase this, uninstall it, right? Because I don't want to have to deal with licenses. Okay, so removal tools. Microsoft has a really cool one, the Microsoft Security Essentials. That thing kind of sort of isn't available anymore. They kind of morphed it into something else, but let me just show you what I'm talking about. Microsoft Security Essentials. So basically, this was something back in the day where you could, it's a free anti-malware software stuff. Right? Cool. And basically, it's been replaced with Windows Defenders. I mean, it's in the book here, but basically, what it's trying to tell you is this is the prevention and cure combined together. Now, preventing you, Windows Defender now does the prevention and the elimination thing. You've probably seen lots of times when you go to updates, you'll see a little doodad in there. Let me go ahead and go to my updates guy and look at the history. You'll probably see one of these things that says, well, we'll get down here to the well, that's just the antivirus stuff. Huh, okay. Well, I was expecting to see the one that said, there you go, the software removal. So it has, in its pieces, it updates your virus signatures, and it updates the little engine that does the removal. So it does prevention and remediation both. Cool. I use Malwarebytes when I'm coming up on a system because I assume that this has been compromised. Okay. So there's an awful lot of other ones. Hiring boot disk, we mentioned that before, and Elmsoft, they have another one that basically this is the same thing. It's a pre-boot environment. I'm going to do EMSIsoft emergency kit. Basically what it is just a bootable disk that you can download and fire it up. I use Hiring boot disk exactly the same way. You boot your machine up off of a USB flash drive, and then you run Malwarebytes or whatever is installed on that thing. And you're pretty much guaranteed to get a good clean scan because you know the machine isn't running. Okay, page 113, we talked about rootkits before. Mark Rusinovich, a million years ago, did this thing called Rootkit Revealer. He was one of the first. Rootkit Revealer. And it was a pretty good tool because it was the first of its kind to detect rootkits. The problem is, if a rootkit writer knows how this thing runs, he can defeat it. So it was for a short period of time, about 6 months, he was like tweaking it like every couple of days to make up for the fact that somebody has figured it out, and so he has to figure it out, and back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And then finally he threw his hands up in the air and said, this is a dumb idea. There's no way we can reliably do a rootkit detection while a machine is running. So you're going to have to do the other thing, what we talked about, booting off of a rescue media. Okay. So if I ask you, why is this thing no longer being maintained by Mark, and you should read this little article. It talks all about it. It's kind of cool. What is it? How's it happen? But why are we still doing this anymore? Okay. There's another one. There's one called TDSS Killer. That's the rootkit guy. So, and it's from Kaspersky, and I know a lot of people are freaking out. Because Kaspersky has a bad name. Oh my God, they're a Russian company. Sky is falling. Yeah, quite frankly, it's mostly hype and politics. Very, very little evidence that they have done anything. Anyway, that's another one. I don't particularly use it, but it works. It's free download. You can, same thing. You boot it up and it'll scan your system. Okay. So let's continue. So inspecting startup programs, we've done that before. Now, oddly enough, you don't actually need to do, the auto start guy. I mean, I love the auto start guy, but in Windows 10 and above, if you just go to the task manager, one of the things you can get to is where it says startup. Now, this is not as good, I'll tell you. First of all, you could just tell by the number of how many things are in there. That should tell you. It doesn't really tell you where it is. I mean, is this in the startup, or is this in the registry? Is this WMI? Is this scheduled task? It just dumps them there, which is good. This is good for most people. But of course, I would prefer to go to honest to God real utils where we install that stuff and do auto runs. Yay! And of course, it's this internals. And there's a lot of things called very similar looking thing, but hey. So right off the bat, you could probably tell that I have an awful lot more than what was in here. Yeah, okay. So yeah, which one is kind of sort of better? It shouldn't be too difficult to figure that out. So Windows 10 and 11 doesn't really need a special tool to be able to get to start. It's not as good as this, but if I ask you, can you do it without this? The answer is yes. Okay. Boot analyzers. There's a diagnostic and recovery tool called Dart. Oh, it's really a fantastic tool. Really, Dart is. The problem is, it's not available to you, and it's available to enterprise people only. And it's a really cool tool, but it requires this thing called MDOP. What the heck? I can't remember what that stands for now. Yeah, the desk optimization packet. It's only available to high volume people, enterprise people, and I can't even get it with my subscription level. So it's a cool tool, but you can't have it. Hiren's boot disk. Oh yeah, that's always a great one. Now there's a kind of a murky thing with Hiren's boot disk, and that is that, look, everyone kind of sort of knows that the stuff on here is quasi legal. Technically, it's legal. Technically, but you could get an awful lot of trouble if your company says we don't allow this because it's sketchy. And yes, it is sketchy. For example, they're putting trialware and starter versions and free versions of software that you're supposed to pay for. They're putting all that stuff on this disk, knowing darn well you're never ever going to pay for it. And that's the whole point of the ethical part, is whether or not you're paying. Okay, we're coming up on the 15-minute mark.